I think we'll get going. And Danielle, if you're happy to leave the digital door open, and people can join as they arrive in the next 5 minutes or so. First of all, I would like to thank everybody for coming to this event. It's beyond Tarmac. We're going to talk about strategic issues around walking in streets. And we're going to go from the strategic to the sort of very practical realities of walking. For people that don't know me, I'm Stuart Hay. I'm Director of Living Streets Scotland. But this event will be delivered by my colleagues Kate and Anne, who are behind it and who've done all the work behind it, and Danielle is in the background doing all the tech for us today. If you're not aware, we are recording the event, and that's just for our purposes, so we can take some notes and provide good feedback after the event. I'd also like to thank the Scottish Government who fund our work on streets and with communities, so this event would be possible without that. I'm just going to jump straight into this. So Kate is going to introduce the concepts. We are then going to give you an opportunity to give your feedback and in discussion groups. First of the groups are going to be quite large because the event has been very popular. So we'll work around that. There will then be a break, and then we'll come back and discuss some of the themes. And this is part of a series of events. We've got a second event to follow up, which will really dig down into the detail of what happens when you try and get some stuff done. And we're focusing on benches, which is our dabbling with capital programs, if you like. And gosh, if it's difficult to put on a bench, and I have real sympathy for the people doing the big stuff. So hopefully we will pick out some themes from that. But I'm going to hand over to Kate, and she's going to kick off the event and give us some background to this topic.
I think that leaves Danielle trying to let people in and change the spotlight on who's picked up on screen. So that's going to take a moment. Oh, there we go. Thanks, Danielle. Probably could have done that myself, actually. Okay, it's a slide deck for me, so you don't have to look at my face for long. I'm just going to share my screen and we can get kicked off. And there we go. Everybody should be looking at a big pink slide. So good morning, everyone. I'm Kate Joester. I'm a project coordinator with Living Streets Scotland. I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes here about why walking and walking infrastructure matters, what it actually is, and then I'm going to introduce the discussion groups about how we can get that. So why does it matter? I'm not saying walking can save the world, but I am saying it can get us about 80% of the way there. That's probably the only statistic I'll use that I can't back up if you ask me later. Let me see, how do I get to the next slide? There we go, perfect. Why does walking matter? Well, it's a way to get to net zero. Obviously, if people are walking, they're not in cars, and that's important. Walking is a way to improve physical health. I think that's really obvious. It's after all a form of exercise as well as everything else. Improves mental health. We'll go and have a little look at that later. It furthers social and economic justice. I'm going to go into that a bit more because that may be the least intuitive thing that I'm saying here. And it builds local community and economy. We can back that one up too. So, walk to save the planet. Transport is the UK's biggest CO2 emitter. Private cars are 56% of those emissions. So we've succeeded really well in our power industry no longer being the biggest emitter. It's now transport. And that is not heading in the right direction. And specifically, private cars are the biggest single contributor to that. I would argue, and I'm going to argue right now, that the quickest way to get people out of cars is to get them on their feet. If you look at this, this is Transport Scotland data, modal share of all journeys 2019, cars are right up there at the top. But what's directly below that? Walking, and that's walking as the main part of the journey. That's not walking a little bit of the journey. So obviously, lots of people already walk. Most people can walk and know how to walk. So let's focus on the fact that 22% of people 22% of journeys, sorry, in 2019 were made on foot. Right below that is buses. Public transport users are pedestrians. Your bus doesn't stop at your door. You have to walk to the bus stop. So when we're talking about pedestrian infrastructure, it also crucially serves the purpose of getting people onto public transport for longer journeys that perhaps are less walkable in terms of time. So we've got 7% on buses. We've got that 2% down there on trains as well. We love bikes, but bikes are 1% of journeys. If we are talking about getting people out of their cars in time to meet our net zero targets, in time to save the planet, walking is the intervention. It's the way to go. So this is the bit about mental and physical health. 1 in 6 premature deaths in the UK are attributable to physical inactivity. So there's lots of illnesses and conditions which are related to physical activity, or which can be improved by physical activity. And 1 in 6 deaths in the UK, premature deaths. 40,000 premature deaths each year in the UK are attributed to air pollution. And again, as we know, a significant contributor to air pollution is traffic. That's more than 14 million working days lost to stress, depression, and anxiety every year in the UK. So walking is the most likely way all adults can achieve the recommended levels of physical activity according to NICE. So it works. It works to make people physically healthier. It's achievable, it's maintainable. 74% of adults, this is, I'm afraid, England data, agree we should be reducing the amount we use motor vehicles to improve our health specifically. So this is without all the other considerations. This is about people knowing that they would be healthier if they stopped going by car. And physically active people report being happier, less anxious, and have a stronger sense of social integration. We know that activity prescriptions can be as effective as antidepressants in treating mild depression. So we can address misery, and that's important too, but we can also address the working days lost to it. This is the bit that, well, is my particular passion, and which I think maybe it feels less intuitive to some people. Walking is a social justice issue. We can build communities, and again, social integration is one of those mental health factors. There is a correlation between neighbourhood walkability and neighbourhood social capital. So that's people feeling positive about their neighbourhood being, by various measures, a good place to be. And between perceptions of neighbourhood safety and walking rates. So how safe do you think your neighbourhood is? If it's higher, you're more likely to walk. Now, I think it's pretty clear that this is going to be a circular correlation. If it feels safe to walk, you're more likely to walk. But if there's lots of people walking in your neighbourhood, you probably feel safe to walk yourself. And likewise with social capital. The equity issues, I think, are not fully explored. Who walks? Poorer people, both in terms of their household income, so their sort of personal income, and also living in an area of higher social deprivation, are more likely to walk their main journey. So that's by walking, like that's walking to work, for example. And also poorer children walk to school. If you look at the journey to school, 52% of children walk that key journey. Only 12% of journeys to work are primarily walked journeys. So again, we're talking about social justice for a mode of transport that's strongly biased towards children. Funnily enough, people in remote towns have a very high rate of walking to work. I think that's actually something unexplored. It maybe doesn't relate as closely to the social justice issue, but came across that, loved it, thought you ought to know. When we look at access to a car, which is people who either have to walk everywhere or cycle everywhere or get public transport everywhere, which again requires walking, or would do that if they could get out of their doors, which in some cases they can't. 29% of households in Scotland don't have a car. Car ownership also varies by housing ownership. So 86% of homeowners have a car, private renters 57%, public renters 37%. The least likely households to have a car are single pensioner households. If you look at ability to drive, more men than women have driving licenses. That gap is closing, but that also means that gender justice around access to a car or needing to walk is greater for older women than it is for younger women. Okay. that I'm going to throw in here that so work we did last year on the use of equalities impact assessments in active travel and place projects found most of them have either no at ground level, most of them have either no equalities impact assessment or one which does not recognize any differential impact of active travel. This is a tool we should be using, we must be using. This is a mindset we must be using when we think about walking. And here we go, walk to save the high street. Local economies are significantly improved by walkability and walking rates. It's actually really hard to get hard data on. This is our updated pedestrian pound, which was updated in 2018. It's hard to get national hard data, but we have some really great case studies showing that public realm improvements increase footfall on high streets, increase spending, and increase people's satisfaction with their experience of their high street. And this, now I've convinced you, I know I've convinced you that this matters enormously. Now I'm going to say that the reason that it matters now is because we are in a unique position to use national and international circumstances to get everybody walking. So at COP26, Scotland committed to being a net zero country by 2045. At the moment, National Planning Framework 4 is out of consultation, and it looks at planning for the whole of Scotland, what the frameworks are, what the drivers behind it are, until, funnily enough, 2045. So the whole of the time that we are going to achieve net zero is covered by NPF 4. It is really important. NPF 4's principles are sustainable places, walkable and low traffic, livable places, so living locally, productive places with a particular focus on equity and the well-being economy, and distinctive places. So bang on for all of the stuff that we've just been talking about. The COVID recovery plan for Scotland has a well-being economy focus and wants to address inequalities. So again, bang on target for us. For sort of more ongoing agendas are around loneliness, community mental health, and physical activity targets. Those have been going on for a little while, and I think we kind of understand why walking feeds into them. So this is us saying we've had enough. These cartoons are from an event that we did a few years ago, and I absolutely love them. You'll be seeing more of them as we go through. So walking infrastructure, it isn't rocket science. Actually, when you ask people, you go, yeah, that makes sense. So we're talking about barriers here. So the negative side, what stops people from walking? Poor maintenance of pavements and paths, conflict with other modes of transport. When we were working, this data comes from mostly from our work specifically. So our 3 year Walking Connects project, which was with older people across Scotland, our Out and About project, which was working with, again, sort of furthering that work with older people in specific parts of Scotland, worked back in a few years back in Perth and Kinross, working with access panels to do route planning for disabled people, and also draws on some research. Again, we'll send out these slides if you want them. Well, I think we're sending them out whether you want them or not, to be honest. And that will have the citations that I'm using here. The thing that perhaps came up more strongly than you might expect is places to rest and toilets. If people can't be sure that their legs are going to carry them the whole way, then they also need to be sure that there's a bench, and that it's more important than you think. And toilets, people plan going out around toilets. Now, I think there's going to be a lot of people here who've had to plan around small children and their bladder size. So I think it's going to be quite familiar to a lot of people having to plan around toilets. Older people very typically do it. Disabled people also are another group who have to think quite a lot about toilet access and whether they're going to be able to go out for a period of time. Other people's behaviour. So it kind of calls back to that question of community cohesion and feelings of safety, feeling the solidarity that if you're somebody who's a bit fragile in the street, people are going to collaborate to keep you safe. How to get it right, the positive things. So you need to think about the whole route. We don't walk, we can't walk a journey if we can't walk all of the journey. So if there's one thing wrong, you're going to do it another way, or you're not going to do it at all. So there's no point in fixing this broken pavement if over there is a barrier that the majority of people can't get through, whatever it is. Understand the details, so understand how people experience their environment and exactly what would make a difference. And if we want to talk about walking as a key mode of transport, it needs to be something that people can plan to use using good data, and it needs to be reliable. It needs to be there when you expect it to be there. And that's how you get streets fit for everyone. So thinking a bit more about this whole route approach, ask the question, who's going from where to where? So what is the journey? What are the key journeys? Are we looking at a school street where, you know, a route, for example, from a large piece of housing to the local primary, the local secondary? Are we looking at a route from, now you might be hearing more about this example in lots of other things, for a route from sheltered housing to the shops? Are we looking at a route that goes to a bus stop up a steep hill? That's one that we'll definitely be hearing about in the next webinar. So who is walking? Where are they going from? Where are they going to? Can they make the whole route? How do they know how to get there? Well, yes, one of the things that, I mean, just an example that I found working with a group at a local church, when we looked at maps and went out for walks, people discovered that they could have walked to the church as quickly as they're driven there. They just didn't know. They're so habituated to assuming that the car is the quickest way of getting there. So using techniques with information, with signage, with I love an isochrone map, which is showing how far can you get from here in 5 minutes. And then you go into your place of work and it shows that, oh, you could have walked here quicker than you drove here. Information and signage. If you are walking along a path, signs need to be directed at you as a walker. So when you're going to turn off that path, where are you going to go? What's that road that goes over the path, and so on? There's some really good examples of this, but there's also some really poor examples of this. What might people need on the way? So going back again to toilets, because if you're looking at a destination where people are going to go and spend time, if you're going to be out for more than an hour, there might well need to be a toilet there. Benches, because again, if your route to the bus stop's really steep, you might need to sit down. You can't take the hill away, but you can take the experience of it being too steep away. Play parks, maybe if a family with young kids are going up to town, it might be nice to have a play park on the way so the kids can get their play behavior out before they hit town. And everybody wants their walk to be nice. You know, why shouldn't it be pleasant to walk? It might rain sometimes, it might sometimes be slower, but what it can be is a fantastic opportunity to chat with friends, to listen to music, to listen to bird song, to be in nature. Walking has so many unique attractors that we should be putting them into play. So understanding the detail, again, like I said, it's about what's a good path for this community, for this use. You need to ask communities, and you need to ask them in detail, in really fine detail, that sort of street level. It's not okay to just assume that this is going to be okay for this community here. Planning and reliability. Can people depend on their path being open or being told when it's not going to be open? I nearly went out very early this morning and took spite photographs to illustrate this. Within one street of my house, there is a pavement that's blocked by a sign to tell cars that the road coming up is closed on the left. It's not closed to walkers, but you can't get there now because the pavement's blocked. By contrast, in one street in another direction, you come to a pavement, you walk along a pavement, and then it's suddenly completely blocked by some fencing and builder's rubble beyond it. And the first you hear of it is a big sign actually on that fence that says footway ahead closed. No kidding, you think, as you walk directly into it. Can you expect that snow and ice clearing will happen? Can you expect that leaf clearing will happen? Can you expect that you will be and feel safe on your path, especially if you're a vulnerable walker? So you're somebody who fears falling. Fear of falling is a huge huge, 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 particularly for older people and for some disabled people. And is maintenance going to happen? Can you expect that it will be noticed, that it will be taken seriously, and that it will be acted on in a timely way? Okay. This is actually the last slide. Oh, I think I'm coming in on time as well. People are going to be pleased with me. Now you know how to, either what infrastructure you might need, or how to find out what infrastructure might be important to communities. You might know already because you've done that work. You might be a community who is, I know what I want. How do I make it happen? Know, as I said, that national policy supports you. That at the moment we're in a national policy position where actually everything is there for you. All of the powers should be behind you. But at local level, like I said, it can be a real struggle, because sometimes that implementation is not coming from those larger perspectives. It's not drawing on those ways of thinking about space and thinking about travel, and a bit controversial. Sometimes it can be responding to voices which are louder than they need to be. And we need to think about how we can make the voices of people walking, people using public transport, how we can make those voices as politically pertinent as some of the others. So what we're going to do next, I think we may actually be a little bit ahead of time, but I think that's survivable. Oh, apparently we're good. I'm getting some hand signals. Is going to some discussion groups. That's going to be for half an hour. And we're going to discuss what do you think the infrastructure needs to be? How can you influence it? Who can you bring with you? And what processes are there to help you to do that? So we're going to drop into those discussion groups. That will run for half an hour. At the end of that, we'll have a 10-minute break. Then we'll come back to have a little discussion.
Great. I think it's everybody back. We had a really good discussion in our group. I probably who would like to go first and just sort of give us a flavour of what was talked about in terms of the what, who, and how of walking infrastructure.
We can kick off if you like, Stuart.
Great.
So in terms of we talk about walking infrastructure, we of course mentioned that pavements and pathways and cycling are an important aspect of that, but we also highlighted that benches and resting places were very important. A key theme around this was accessibility, that the infrastructure was for all and should be developed with everyone in mind. Some of the issues that were raised was lack of funding, a lack of care shown to paths and pavements in towns and in the countryside, and our reliance on lottery bids. Also that it doesn't always require major works to make improvements, that dealing with things like leaves, street furniture, litter and ice can bring about massive improvements in terms of the accessibility of those pavements and pathways to elderly people and to those who have got mobility or visually impaired issues. What we discussed who was key to bringing about these improvements, and people and communities were a key theme. A really local community action was a key driver in terms of helping to inform the councils about what the needs are and helping to shape designs. But equally, we talked about better relationships with the local authorities so that people and communities could report things like ice on the pavements and pathways, which was an interesting point. It was also raised that whilst we are looking to, as always, improve the maintenance and upkeep of our pavements and pathways, we should also be looking at how we can improve new infrastructure at the same time. And that might be working with developers who are building new housing schemes to make sure that those housing schemes are permeable on foot. And just towards the end there, we chatted about sort of our approach to this, and one of our contributors from Edinburgh's Council had mentioned about the importance of cross-service working to their work, and how they were looking to liaise with local community hubs within the city, and also speaking with communities directly. Yeah, I think that's a summary of where we got to. Stuart, anything you want to add?
I think that covered everything. I think the other interesting point was the confusion that the word active travel creates, and we had a good discussion about that, and it was actually potentially excluding people who are interested in walking because there was an association with cycling, which may or may not be correct. And there's an argument: should we just start talking about walking, cycling, and wheeling as the new normal, and active travel is maybe a little bit long in the tooth in terms of being useful? But I thought that was a useful insight, I think.
Yeah, I mean, just to preempt what Chris said, we had a bit of discussion about people shouldn't have to think about it. They shouldn't have to think I'm engaging in some active travel. How's my infrastructure to go for a walk or to walk to the bus stop? But maybe we should bring Chris in before I start talking more.
Do you want the feedback from that group, Kate? Yeah, should we go with that? Okay. And so that I don't just throw a load of words at you, I've put it in the chat, and I will just summarize briefly for you now. So if you want to read the full detail of Kate's breakout group, it's there for you to have a look at your leisure. Under the 3 headings, what does walking infrastructure mean to you, and how can you influence it? You can see there, I think at an infrastructure level, basic access level, that's a fail-safe check, benchmark against that. Legibility, taking opportunities, that came up quite a bit. Making links, we were doing some of that on that breakout group as it happened. Yeah, you can see hurdles with multi-partner operations. You would guess that would be there, and taking on responsibility for all the components. Having a champion on the inside, it's often 1 or 2 people that can make this tick over. Responsible, and who else should be involved? Yeah, that's always a challenge, no matter how loud you say it and how often there's going to be somebody somewhere that either doesn't feel involved or hasn't been involved for whatever reason. So no magic wand for that, but there's some suggestions down there which you can read involving quite a few groups that you'll be aware of. I think that point number 4 there was interesting, that it was trying to summarize around what Kate was just saying, that you being able to walk into a conversation where you're not having to scene set would be wonderful, because I think all of us working in this arena often have to do so much scene setting before we even begin on what we want to do. And I think I don't know how we ask that or how we get it, but that's a massive cultural shift. And then finally there, the processes for getting heard. There's just 3 examples, but there were plenty coming up. One that Mark Simmons from Edinburgh raised was the school travel planning process, which is one I'm familiar with. But it is an example of a system that's there that is probably underutilized in terms of accessing some of the levers to get things done. Interesting group discussion, and say it's all there in the chat if you want to read over it.
Okay, Anne, are you next up for feedback?
Yeah, lovely. I was sort of slightly facilitating, slightly taking notes, so inevitably I've not done a very good job of putting it into nice neat categories, but we had a fantastic conversation and really interesting, and I really liked everything that was said in the room. Actually, I thought was very helpful, but we were commenting that often with when we think of active travel, as Chris said, the scene setting, but it's, with walking, it's not necessarily big projects, it's lots of little things. And walking can often fall between the cracks because it isn't anybody's responsibility as such, and it's not clear whose responsibility. And someone made a very good point that, you wouldn't put the traffic lights in the middle of the road to create a pinch point, but very often the poles on the pavements and the other pinch points you get on pavements are caused through that lack of thought. And how do we get to change that? And the message that gives is that walking's not important. We had an example as well of a big hospital where the assumption was clear that you were going to drive, and there was a path, but it wasn't very accessible and it wasn't maintained, and you know, it wasn't passable if you had a buggy or a wheelchair or had any mobility issues. And that's not only frustrating because you have to find the people that can do the maintenance and get them to do the maintenance, but because it sends out the message that, well, everybody's going in the car, and so that's all we need to think about. And we need to change the mindset. We had a bit of, you know, the assumption that the car is most important is the biggest barrier, and we need to rearrange the road space. And also an assumption that quality is less important when it comes to walking, whereas actually that's so not true. It's much more important. Who else should be involved? We had a really good discussion about the bureaucracy that surrounds a lot of the walking, and a little bit of where that came from. And from some of it was about objecting to big roads, and particularly building of motorways back in the day, and that happened without consultation. So we seem to have gone the other way, whereas now you can't do the slightest little thing without a massive amount of consultation and bureaucracy, and that really isn't helpful. Fortunately, Stuart Logan is going to solve it all, because he's meeting with Patrick Harvey this afternoon. So by tea time, that's, oh no, okay, maybe not quite, but certainly we think, you know, the other people that need to be involved are our local authorities, our councillors, our MPs, are the government, to make some changes. We were talking about the fact that there is the 7-day experimental TRO process. A TRO is, I'll get this wrong, is what does
Traffic
TRO
regulation order.
Thank you very much, Kate. Traffic regulation order, in order to change the purpose of a road or a street, you need to implement a TRO, and it's a very time-consuming process. So we had a bit of discussion about the need to look at, you know, having almost a checklist of all the barriers, such as the length of time. And if objections, we also had the example from the Causey in the south side of Edinburgh, looking at making changes from a very very vehicle heavy area to become a more walking friendly area, and they've had a fantastic amount of success, but their planning application is being reviewed, and the objections are being reviewed, and that's been therefore held up for 3 years. And, you know, who do we speak to about saying, how do we impose a time limit on that? And that was, you know, so there are ways of doing this fast, but who do we need to speak to? Is we need to find the key barriers and find the key people that can actually help to change those decisions, because some of these decisions, they just haven't been changed, they've evolved, they've happened, they're unintended consequences. So those were the main. We had a very wide-ranging and fantastic conversation.
Robert, I think is Chloe still there, or
I'm ready to feedback, just because we don't know what Chloe's internet's doing. I was struck in our conversation by even initially that the list of what needs to be different for pedestrians, the list of stuff which is about pedestrian infrastructure, is actually longer and more complicated than we think. And we've talked about a lot of things, but I think that just really came across to me in our discussion. Even just listing the obvious stuff still gives you a long and complicated list. When we got to talking about how to influence change, I think there were some very interesting things said which are not necessarily obvious, like that a lot of people just don't realize what is needed for, you know, ensuring that we have kind of inclusive streets, and that one of the more powerful things is just to start a conversation. So just starting to talk about this stuff actually makes it powerful, because it's not being talked about, and articulating clearly what the issues are to people who are, you know, who don't have such a big problem walking or being pedestrian in our streets. Just articulating the level of the problem for the people who do have a problem is also really powerful. That's part of just articulating, but particularly targeting people who are in a position of responsibility. And there's always stuff like kind of money for maintenance, but then going on to just pressure from local people. So as part of articulating what's, you know, the problems are, pressure from local people, even about benches, because local people have got used to there not being benches. So raising their hopes that there should be benches, so that they then put pressure on people to say, why are there no benches? Just that in itself being a powerful influence. On ideas for kind of processes, we had some quite nice stuff. So we need some national guidance on how to design streets. You know, we have some guidance in some local authorities, but potentially we need guidance, national guidance. But more than that, we don't just need the guidance, we need training for people on how to use that. I quite often think that guidance is a bit like a checklist that people use when they're flying an airplane. It tells you what to do. If you already know how to fly the airplane, the guidance tells you how to check to do that kind of fine tuning at the end. But you still need the book that tells you how to actually fly the airplane before you get to the checklist. So guidance, training, but also we already have some processes which are powerful, potentially powerful, like equality impact assessments, but that aren't being used to anything like the power that they could be. And Kate, I know that you've done some extensive work on that. But that remember, we don't need new processes. Maybe we just need some work to make the existing processes work properly, and training and support on how to use those. And then the last point I think was a really powerful point on that, was that one of the things we need is in the existing processes, the existing processes around how our streets look, we need input from those people who are currently excluded into those existing processes, because that's one of the problems, is if those people do not get to input onto those, then we lose those voices. That was us.
Great. And now we're going to call the Highlands and see how the internet is up there. Chloe, are you there?
I think Chloe might be on a delay still.
Yeah, okay. Still not, we're only 2 years into the pandemic and we still haven't quite got the Zoom working for everyone.
I mean, I just wanted to jump in there and observe one thing about what Robert in particular was saying was, we've got all these mechanisms. We acknowledge that sometimes they're not being used. What happens when they're not used? What consequences are there? It's compulsory to do an equality impact assessment, but as I know I've banged on about before, they just aren't done and nothing happens. There is no comeback. So what teeth do we have? Yes, we can build goodwill, we can build networks, we can try and get in at the ground level, but what are we supposed to do about it when people ignore us?
Yeah, I think this is something interesting. Just moving into the sort of discussion of some of the points that are there. I think councils are under tremendous pressure and things are missed. It's not out of malice or even lack of training. I think literally people don't have the time or the resources to do stuff or do it well, and they just do what they can. And I'm in full admiration of what people do with the resources they have. But ultimately it doesn't deliver the results we need. And that's the problem, and we need to move on from that. That I think the other side of that is if people are spending lots and lots of time doing TROs and we've got limited resources, they're not spending the time doing equality impact assessments. And I think I know which is the more important process. So you can pass a TRO that hasn't been subject to an equality impact assessment. So what value is that TRO if that's the process we're looking at in Scotland? So some profound issues there about, and we had in our group, we had a lot of discussion about consultation with communities, and something like traffic regulation order is not a consultative mechanism for engaging communities in terms of that process and how it works. So I would think we need to take a big step back about what that process is trying to do against all the other processes. As we've not got Chloe, what we decided to do is we can bring people in. If you just put questions, comments, points you want to make in the chat, we will keep an eye out for that and then bring people in. And if you don't want to do that, just it's easier for us to manage things on that basis. But if you have a problem typing that up or something like that because of the situation you're in, just put your hand up. But in the first instance, we'll see how this works going through the chat. And I think this is a point from Matt Davis, who would be worth bringing in terms of the lack of understanding he was talking about. So Matt, do you want to expand on the point you made in the chat?
Yeah, I'll just bring myself off all the mute and video. Yeah, no, I think it's what Robert was saying. I think and Kate, that there isn't really a good understanding of how all this impacts different types of people. So yeah, I think there's a lot more that needs to be done on equalities. It's still, even though it's been a legal duty for about 10 years, it still feels like a relatively new, not well understood thing when you speak to a lot of councils. So yeah, there was a suggestion about having some examples, some kind of. I don't like the idea of having a checklist, but it might give people a start of like what are the kinds of impacts of this kind of stuff on elderly, on people who are on maternity leave, on the disabled people, etc., etc., etc. Might give them a start, but I think it does come down to the time to involve people and get their real experiences. So yeah, I think there's a lot we could do on that.
Yeah, thank you.
Quickly comments was that I mean, I think we've talked about kind of how to get this on people's agendas, and actually a lot of it is about getting it into people's minds and, you know, to be a bit soppy about it, hearts, get people to see it, understand it, internalize it, make it part of their daily thinking and practice. And we've talked about, you know, continuing professional development. We've talked about getting into universities, because actually it ultimately comes down to the folks who decide what concrete is laid where, and who then actually do it. And we know that bringing people together with disabled people to experience the streets as they experience it is really effective. We've done that. We know that it changes practice. But it's how to bring that mindset to everybody who, and a lot of people who come into sort of planning and roads and transport not through an equalities lens, and that's fine. But how to give them that lens, how to give them that tool and that way of thinking.
I'm going to just to prompt something here, so we're positive about things. Does anyone have any good examples of where this stuff has been done well that we should be aware of and be celebrating at events like this, even if we have a future event? Because I'm afraid we're not finding great examples. I can point, I haven't seen what's happening in the cycling side of things. I can see projects emerging that are really good. And the public and the walking pedestrian side, I think a lot of the good stuff is either way out in the sticks in terms of long distance routes and all this sort of stuff to your tourist infrastructure, or right in your city centres in terms of public realm. And I'm not saying the neighbourhood stuff, but am I wrong? So I'm going to throw that out there.
Just, I mean, we had somebody in our breakout room who might want to make himself known, who's working on pedestrian stuff in Edinburgh and has a really interesting agenda that just sounded perfect to me. But sorry.
Is that myself? It's Andy. Sure, I think you're aware of it from our previous discussions with Daisy about the pedestrian improvement programme that's developing in Edinburgh, about looking at junctions, looking at traffic signals and reducing the kind of call time or extending their time, improving those environments as a whole for pedestrians, from introducing seating areas, making sure that there are dropped curbs or at-level crossings for pedestrians. There's something that's similar I did at Westside Plaza, which is in the west of the city, which was a kind of regeneration project there, which was improving it for pedestrians to try and enhance the uses there, kind of going on the 20-minute neighbourhood theme. I don't know if that is something that you were looking at.
Perfect. No, that's a great example. And I know that sort of programme is emerging, and the other couple of good things that Edinburgh have done is the 8-word span, which is a really small thing in the scheme of things, but it's actually has really big impacts in terms of removing that clutter. And the thing is, not a small thing in terms of implementing it and all the work that goes behind that. So that was a good thing that happened there. And the follow-up from that, and I think, Andy, you were involved in this, is the decluttering programme. So I don't know if you want to say a little bit about that work you did on decluttering, because there may be other councils doing it, but there's not councils I'm aware that are doing it in a sort of strategic, high priority way. So yeah, if you've got anything you can say on that, that'd be perfect.
Yeah, so it came out of the Spaces for People programme as part of the pandemic, where we looked at streets which were obviously the footways were narrow. So it was trying to maximise that space for pedestrians by removing things like guardrail and bollards and redundant poles that could either be repositioned or just removed completely. Trying to discuss with our colleagues in Waste and Cleansing about the positioning of communal bins and litter bins. We also we had like 18 of these large signs that were around Edinburgh, which took up about half of the footway, which highlighted how many car parking spaces there were at various points within the city. So we got all these removed just to provide that additional space. So as part of that pedestrian improvement programme, it's like taking that on a citywide basis.
Thank you. So yeah, that I mean, we're talking pedestrian improvement programs, which is what we think we want to get out of these sorts of. So that's great to hear that type of work kicking off, and I do appreciate that. It's tough, but the other thing about Edinburgh is there is 10% of the budget is on active travel, which makes these things possible. And I know a few other councils are heading in that direction. So I think I just used the word active travel after criticising everybody earlier. But
there's lots of things going on in the chat which are really interesting, and somebody's talking about budgets and the budget consequences of what we're talking about. I did this in breakout room, so I'm going to really annoy the folk who are in the breakout room with me. But when we talk about justice, we're often talking about actually allocating money to make that justice happen. And the key example that I always bring up is the one about Swedish snow clearing, which, when it was subjected to gender budgeting analysis, showed that they were clearing paths, or they were clearing routes, driven routes, used by more men than women, and that women actually needed the pavements cleared. So they reallocated some of that funding to further equality, because they were using the tools of analysis that are readily available to us all. So yeah, I mean, you can say Robin Peters pay Paul, but when we've already established that Paul is the person we want to fund, that's a choice we can and probably should make.
Okay. I've seen a comment in the chat from Susan Janes. I'm sorry if the name's pronounced wrongly. Susan wants to come in on talking about driver attitudes and trying to change behaviour. Do you want to say anything more on that?
Yeah, just there's been a lot of discussion, obviously, about what councils can do to improve infrastructure, but what can be done to improve driver attitudes? So, like, it is socially unacceptable for drivers to park in front of driveways, and you never really see that happening, but it's really common for drivers to park in front of other drop curbs, which are put in place for pedestrians trying to cross the roads. And it's really common for tradespeople and delivery vans to block the entire pavement, but they wouldn't stop on the road because that would stop traffic. So if councils don't have the resources to enforce these rules when the pavement parking ban comes in, is there anything that can be done to change drivers' behaviour so that it becomes socially unacceptable to do these things?
Yes, I think that's a good point. I think that's a brilliant point, actually, in terms of that we need to not just think about enforcement and again putting it back on local authorities. We do have to change people's attitudes, and there is a deeper look at people's attitudes to driving, vehicles, self-entitlement, and the sort of practices that people get involved in. I challenged a delivery van guy. He'd parked right across a pedestrian crossing, and I said, "You just can't park there," you know. And I was very polite about it, and he just turned on me and said, "Look, I've got to get things delivered. There is no parking. This is the parking spot. I'm parking. I'm delivering. You know, what do you expect me to do?" And just sort of stomped off. And you know, there was a parking. That was an elite. That was something that was clearly illegal and obviously quite dangerous. And if you had a visual impairment, you crossed out onto the road, you would just walk to the side of a van. But no awareness of the consequences of the action, or if somebody had to, because they couldn't cross somewhere more dangerous, no consequence of that. So I think that's a really good point. But and that I think it does need to think about not drivers as a homogenous group, but that was a delivery driver who had particular motivations, and it's, well, what would change his views? And maybe delivery drivers, they just don't care about disabled people. That's a terrible thing to say, but that one didn't.
And I think, so, I think it reflects
but there's other things, that maybe they are motivated by. Maybe their vans get damaged by bouncing up on pavements, and they don't realise what their life on their tires is. Maybe that's how you get those groups. But, yeah.
Or maybe you go through their employers and say, actually, you need to incentivize your drivers to behave decently above incentivizing them to do things fast. Otherwise, you as an employer will suffer. I think that's where I would want to go in. And
it's a difficult one because, the guy was just wanting to do his job, but it had serious consequences.
And I think it's one of these things that we need a national conversation. That's one of the things, there's a lot of work that can be done locally. And I think we've said, and Kate said at the beginning, that, you need to speak to specific communities about what's happening in their area. But I think there are other things that should be national conversations. I think of the See Me campaign and how through national TV advertising, we still have a massive issue with underfunding of mental health and mental health support services, but there is a terminology and a vocabulary that's been introduced to society through national adverts, and I think that has a value. And I wonder if explaining to people more clearly the impact of parking on a drop curb, because I think people think, I'm only here for a minute, it's fine. They genuinely, I think some people don't care, but I think a lot more people just don't realize the consequences of what they're doing and the bad driving habits. And if there was, some of the active travel money could be put into that, leading that national and national UK wide, I think, because these issues are right across the UK, and I think having a big, massive national conversation about driving behaviour is one of the things that would benefit active travel.
Okay, we are just about out of time, and I've got a few things I need to
Dennis,
say.
sorry, I see your hand up, but
it was basically to say, with the rise in online shopping culture, there are more and more, I've noticed this at the speed that folk drive. Like, I'm not singling out any particular company, but as a lot of them maybe have the essence of speed in their logo, and they're driven. And I know some of the folk that do that, and they can be up to 140 parcels a day they're being asked to deliver, and they're going to think, hang on, if that's flats and I've got to look, I'm going to be way behind schedule. So they're going to put that priority ahead of looking for a safe parking space. And in some cases, it's not actually valid for them to carry, but they're trying to carry from that distance. But to me, it's part and parcel of the whole online shopping thing. I want it, and I want it tomorrow morning. And they're just absolutely, probably the solution, I was going to say the solution might be get more drivers, but then that just means more vehicles on the road, doesn't it?
And actually, do we plan for the online shopping culture? No, it's happened to us really quick. So, when we're looking at national planning frameworks, when we're looking at planning new streets and new developments, have we planned for all of those supermarket vans? Have we planned for all of the Amazon drivers or whatever?
Yeah.
What about having a local place, like a shop, where you could go and pick up your parcels?
Well, the click and collect.
Maybe call it a post office. I think we could call it a post office. And there's your 20-minute neighbourhood, as it used to be. So, it's a good point about thinking about that and this deregulation of the streets, which is maybe something we need to talk about going on. So I'm going to have to as a sort of conclude, this is a really good debate today, and the good news is we will be continuing the discussion. We will maybe get down into the detail of all of this next in 2 weeks' time. Is that or so? Is it get the date correct for our next event? Can you give us the precise date and time?
20 seconds, same time.
20 seconds, same time. We will discuss our experiences of working with communities to get benches installed, and we will easily fill our time on that, and we will probably find a lot of answers to some of the questions of why things don't happen, and the good things that happen when you finally do get to the end of it. But the question we'll be asking is, should it be this difficult, and how can we make it a little bit easier? So please join us for that. I should also say, along these sort of themes, we will be having an annual event, which will be slightly bigger than our seminar. We'll be getting some external speakers in for that one on 31st of March. And I think we're roughly, the working title is A Radical Agenda for Streets, in terms of how you generate change quickly and the scale of the change that is necessary. So please join us for that. That will be in the morning of the 31st. We are also thinking about maybe going out for some walks in the afternoon if we can work the logistics of it. And our risk assessments say the streets are safe enough to take a number of people out for a walk. So hopefully we will see some of you at those events. I would just like to thank the team that put this together, particularly Kate and Anne, and all the facilitators that helped out on the day. Danielle's been in the background making sure the techs work, which just about has worked, which is good. And also to thanks again to Scottish Government who support this work. It wouldn't be possible for us to get out and learn this and have these types of discussion. And finally, thank you for everybody. This was about getting things done, and you're people that usually would be wanting to go out and do things and make things happen. So we particularly value your time and joining us to discuss these issues. It's really helpful for us, and we hope it's helpful for you as well. So thank you for that, and we will see you again, hopefully not in the not too distant future. And hopefully walking will start improving. There is definitely signs of hope there, and we've heard a few good examples today. So we'll look for more of those to share with you. So thanks again. We'll just close it there.
Thanks, everyone.